Hey guys, what is up? My name is Kaylee, welcome back to my channel. I'm trying to get my shit together today because I am feeling low. Not mentally, I'm okay mentally, but physically I'm sick again. Like, what else is fucking new? If you don't like being sick, if you appreciate being a healthy individual, don't have kids. It's just a constant cycle of being sick. My fan was on too, so you know, we're just starting this out like a hot mess. What else is new? Let's get started. We are going to, on a timely fashion, buckle up. I read 15 books. We're gonna get through them all. In March, I read 7 graphic novels, 8 novels, and I DNF'd 1 novel. It was close to 2. We'll get to that. As usual, starting with the graphic novels, then moving into the novels, I go from least liked to most liked per section. 4 4-star graphic novels and 3 5-star graphic novels. Not too shabby. The novels are even better, so can't wait to talk about them. My first 4-star read is Berserk Volume 2 by Kentaro Miura. What to say about this? I think that if you like this style of book, which is like gratuitous violence, if you're a gamer and you've played any of the Dark Souls games or Bloodborne or the new one Akira, this is right up your alley. If you're the kind of person that prefers contemporary or fantasy but not violent fantasy, this is not up your alley. I gave it a 4-star because for what it is, it's pretty good. Not my favorite. I read it because I own it. I probably won't carry on the series because we only have volume 1 and 2 and they're not even ours. They're borrowed from a friend of my husband's, so now that I'm done, we'll be able to give them back. It's pretty good. It's about this man here. His name is Guts. And basically he's just a badass with a giant sword that's like unkillable, and he just kills all these demonic entities that are after him. That's the summation. It's pretty decent. I don't know how many of you guys would actually like it though, so soft 4 stars. My next 4-star had to be Returned to the Library, but that is Akira Volume 2 by Katsuhiro Otomo. I'm really enjoying the series. I really like the anime itself, so it's no shock that I like the series. It's basically about these people that have extra powers and the government knows about them and keeps them like secluded, and there's one ultimate person, Akira, and if he gets out, he's basically going to destroy the world. Well, the 2 people that you follow, one of them gains powers through an accident, and he's got a lot of powers. Whatever is awoken in him is like huge, and he wants to find Akira and awaken Akira so that they can be like powerful together. So he turns pretty evil. It's fascinating. I should say also for Berserk as well as this, there's a lot of like violence, gratuitous violence. In Akira, I've said before in past when I read the first volume that the treatment of women within the manga is not very nice, and you know, they're like objectified and treated dumbly, and I don't really get behind that, but for what it's worth, I'm really enjoying the graphic novel series so far, or rather the manga series so far. My next 4-star reads is due to the fact that I got Hoopla. My library finally got a license or whatever it is for Hoopla, so I went graphic novel crazy and I got V.E. Schwab's Shades of Magic Volume 1, which is the Steel Prince. I enjoyed it. The art style's unique and I like that, and obviously I love being back in the Shades of Magic world, but it wasn't the best. I'm going to continue the series. Obviously V.E. Schwab's one of my favorite writers, unshockingly, but I don't know. I really enjoy being like seeing the background of King Maxim's adolescence and coming into who he is as a person, and I enjoyed the entry of the Pirate Queen. Very cool, but I think it was a little rushed, and maybe it's just because I'm used to V.E. Schwab's Darker Shade series being very fleshed out, but I felt like it was like bang bang bang, and you definitely, maybe not definitely, but you probably need to read the series in order to have as much enjoyment of the graphic novel as I did. I don't think I would start with the graphic novel series and then move to the trilogy, if that makes sense. But it was definitely a 4-star read. I think also it's hard to judge as well. You're reading on an electronic device graphic novels versus seeing the art in person. There's just something about holding a graphic novel that you don't get from reading it on, I read on my iPhone, so take that as you will. Next is a continuation of a series that I picked up on a whim last month and I ended up loving it, and that is Princess Jellyfish Volume 2. This is the omnibus, so it's actually volumes 3 and 4. This is by Akiko Hagishimura. it's weird. There's like representation for cross-dressing, and the trigger warnings that I would say for this is that there's sexual blackmail in it, and I absolutely hate that part of the story, but I can see how it's used in the plot. I just don't think it's a very good plot device. But essentially it's about a group of girls who are kind of like the super nerds of their culture, and they don't like people, they don't like fashionistas, like the pretty girls. They all live together in this building, and the building is going to be bought by a commercialized place that wants to build up a nice apartment complex instead. The main girl has befriended a son of a politician, and he is the cross-dresser, so he dresses up as a woman, and that's how they meet, is he's dressed as a woman, and she brings him back to the place that she lives with these other women who hate men, and realizes he's a man dressed as a woman, and that her roommates cannot figure that out, otherwise she'd get kicked out. And his whole thing is that, like, well, one, he's falling in love with her, but two, he wants to help save their apartment. So it goes further in depth of the relationship and where that is going in terms of the contract. The person that's doing the manipulating is the one, the blackmailing I should say, is the one that's trying to get in on the deal for the apartment complex. There's definitely a lot of different plot lines interwoven in this, and I'm having fun with it. I really enjoy the characters. I don't think it's the best thing ever, and those problematic elements do factor in to lowering it to a 4-star for me, but I think about it often when I'm not reading it, and to me that's a sign of a pretty good manga. I think I've been using graphic novel and manga interchangeably, but like literally my head is just not here right now. My apologies, but you know what I'm saying. I will definitely continue it on the series. I think there's at least 7, if not 8, maybe even more. I'm loving the relationship between Tsukumi and Kuranosuke. He is the secret boy. So their relationship is very interesting, and I like where it's going, so we'll see what happens. My first 5-star is Space Boy Volume 3 by Stephen McCraney. I'm loving this series. There's not a whole lot of depth to it, and they are rather short, and it is like mostly art and not a whole lot of, you can see it's very like chunky art, not a whole lot of narrative, but it is just so cute. It's a middle grade, definitely, teetering on YA, and it's about a girl that grew up on a space colony and then was cryogenically frozen for 30 years because her father lost his job mining in space, and they have to come back to Earth, and all of her best friends back on the spaceship are like in their late 30s, early 40s now, and she's had to like acclimate to Earth, and she's made a friend named Oliver, and Oliver is very different, and most people don't talk to him, don't acknowledge his existence, and he finds her fascinating and vice versa. So this book finally, after two volumes, gets more into the relationship with Oliver, as well as one of the guys in her friend group, the main girl, Amy's friend group, has feelings for her, and he's trying to like act on it. So it really is just like kind of a growing up, coming of age story of a girl who is misplaced and having to find her way in society. I'm enjoying it. I have nothing really bad to say about it. It's pretty simplistic, but the art's great and the story is cute. So my next 5-star read has been my favorite manga series so far since I started it, but it's coming in at the second to best this month, and that is Death Note Volume 4. This is the first time that I can say it's my least favorite volume so far. A lot has happened in this series. I've said it a million times, but in case you're new here, Death Note is about a notebook that is dropped from a different realm where shinigamis, which are death gods, live. And that notebook, when you put someone's name and know what they look like into the notebook, that person will die. You can dictate how you want them to die as long as it's logical. Or if you don't put anything at all, or it doesn't make logical sense, they'll die of a heart attack. A human picks it up, he's a high schooler, he decides he's gonna be God and decide who lives and dies, and it's gotten very convoluted since then. You know, the police force are trying to figure out who this Kira is. Kira is the name of the agent that is killing people. And this one, I don't know how to explain my qualms with it without giving away spoilers, so what I'll say is that it's getting really ridiculous. At this point, there are so many characters and so many facets of it, and the violence is getting, I've used the word before, but gratuitous. Like, people are dying left and right, the power struggle is insane, women are treated even worse in this book than in Akira, and like they're just pawns, and it's hard to like separate from that when it's one of the main plot points in this. Is there are two like main women within this that are used, that's it, they're just used to further the male characters' objectives, and that kind of sucks. But also where it's headed, I'm not sure I'm on board with it, so I'm going to read Death Note Volume 5 for my owls this month, and hopefully it picks back up. We're introduced to a whole new Shinigami this volume, so that was interesting because it's mostly just humans and lots of male humans. But generally speaking, this is a really great series, and I think it's very creative, and it's probably my favorite manga series of all time so far. It just wasn't my favorite manga of the month. That said, let's get into what is my favorite manga of the month, and that is Orange, the Complete Collection, Volume 1 by Ichigo Takano. I read this while I was doing vlogs, so I did have some, you know, if you watch my vlogs, you know some of my opinions on it. There are trigger warnings for suicide, for depression. It is a very heavy book, know that going in. It talks almost solely about depression, and when you have a friend that's suffering from depression. And the book is about a group of friends, told mostly from the perspective of a girl named Naho, and she gets a letter from herself in the future that is asking her to change some of the decisions she made 10 years previously, because one of the people that she befriends, that her friend group befriends, dies, and they find out it is by suicide. He chose to die, and they didn't know that at the time. Like, they knew he died, but they thought it was an accident. The qualms I have with it was a total 5-star for me. My heart was in it, I cared about the characters, I really want to get to number 2, but I'm saving it for the Asian readathon next month. If you don't know about it yet, now you do. Cindy's channel will be down below, who is the host of it, and I'll link you right to the announcement, so you should check it out. In any case, I really wanted to get right back into Volume 2, but I took a break for other books as usual. We all do that. My qualms are just that the main focus of the book is that she wants to change things that she did in the past in order to save her friend that has died. And she feels guilt anytime she doesn't make the right decision, because she thinks she can save him, and then when she doesn't make the right decision, when it doesn't work, her guilt eats her up. She cries a lot. The guilt is literally eating her alive. And it's really hard for me to read that knowing that no one is responsible for anybody else's depression and suicidal ideation and actually committing suicide. The only person at the end of the day is the person who made the decision. Yes, you can be a good friend, you can be supportive, you can be there for someone who is struggling, but the guilt that she carries, the weight on her and all of her friends, is a lot, and it is not their responsibility. So that was hard to read. If you have anxiety about suicide, if you suffer from depression, if you have a history of that kind of thing, I would steer clear of this book, because that is literally all this thick book is about. But I absolutely loved it. My heart was in it. Total 5-star for me. A new favorite series. There's only 2 complete collections, so once that's it, that's it. But I'm really looking forward to reading it next month. And now we're into the novels. So let me start off by saying that initially I had DNF'd 2 books. One at 50%, which I did DNF entirely, completely, will not be going back to it. The other at 28%, and that ended up being a 4-star book, and I'll explain when I get there why, but I wanted it to be known that I almost DNF'd it and was saved. So it made me think, like, how many books have I DNF'd in my past that could have been amazing reads? My goal this year was to just drop a book if I didn't like it, and I've been sticking to it, but I'm feeling very conflicted, so let's just talk about the DNF. I DNF'd Stephen King's Gerald's Game. It sort of had me sometimes, and then it definitely didn't have me other times. So let me just real quick, trigger warnings so you can skip ahead if you want to. There is child molestation in this book via a parent. There is spousal insinuation of rape. There is a lot of really, really fucked up things that all align under those two overarching themes. And if either of those sound like something you would not be interested in, just don't even bother. I DNF'd it due to the child molestation. So Gerald is the husband and Jessie is the wife, and they play a lot of like kinky S&M games all on his accord. He wants to do it. He's this like pompous male lawyer, and he gets his like jollies from dominating his wife. She doesn't really like that, but she kind of plays along, right? So they've gone up to this cabin with the intent of doing that. She's handcuffed to the bed when she decides she doesn't want it anymore. She tells him no. He keeps going thinking it's part of the game, and she's like, no, I'm serious. I don't want to do this. Unhandcuff me. Like, get the keys, get these off me. I'm not interested. And she sees him recognize her seriousness over it. She really doesn't want to do this. And then she sees him pretend not to recognize it and continue on with the game. And at that point I'm already like, I know Stephen King writes whatever. No holds barred. He never ever shies away from a topic. But even this was like a little too much for me. In any case, Gerald has a heart attack and dies before anything really happens. That's why I referred to it as insinuated rape, because it didn't actually happen, but enough of it happened that I was like, this probably isn't the first time. So anyway, he dies. She's chained to a bed in the middle of nowhere in their like getaway cabin on a lake. And obviously it's a battle of her panic, like, how am I gonna get out of this situation? The keys are across the room. I can't move. No one's gonna find us. What am I gonna do? And she keeps going back to her childhood in which her father molested her. And she keeps thinking about it and thinking about it. And the point in which I DNF'd was at 48%, and that was because it got to the molestation. It started to talk about the physical act, and I was like, I can't. I'm a mother of 3 children, and I'm done. I don't want anything to do with this. The only part that I really appreciated is there was a horror element where she woke up and she thought she saw something in the shadows, but she wasn't completely confident if it was real or in her head, and I still am not confident if it was real or in her head, but if there had been more of that and less of the disgusting child molestation bullshit, I might have been in, but I'm not in, and I'm gonna unhaul this because I don't even want to own it. Alright, now that I've talked about that terrible book, my DNF for like 15 minutes, let's get into what I actually completed. So I read 8 novels. 1 3-star, 4 4-stars, and 3 5-stars. So it was a really good reading month, and we'll start off with a 3-star. That is When the Sky Fell on Splendor by Emily Henry. I loved A Million Junes by Emily Henry, like one of my favorite books of the year when I read it, and I believe 2017. I had high hopes for this. It was marketed as being like The Serpent King by Jeff Sentner meets Stranger Things, and I can see why, because it had a lot to do with friendship and aliens, and Emily Henry is really good at like the magical realism in a very contemporary setting, and she did nail those things, but the plot itself kind of fell short for me. Basically, in Splendor, Ohio, Franny and her brother Arthur, so like in Splendor, Ohio, there is an accident at the mill, and the mill is where like a lot of the people from Splendor had worked, and the accident killed several people, and their older brother, Franny and Arthur's older brother, was like knocked unconscious, and he's still alive but unconscious, and kind of the town kind of has this feel of like depression and loss, and that's kind of what brings them together. So there's this friend group that includes both Franny and Arthur, and they always do things together. They have this YouTube channel that they kind of do like ghost hunting things, and one night when they're filming for this at what's supposed to be like a haunted house, something falls from the sky during a meteor shower. And they go out and they interact with the object that has fallen from the sky, and then they wake up like half a day later. It's like they were at night, and now it's like dawn, and there's dew everywhere, and they're wet from the morning dew, and they don't know what happened in those hours. And so it's kind of like the fallout from that. They're trying to figure out what happened to them. They all start finding, they have like scars from it. They start finding out they have powers, and it goes from there. What is it? Someone saw them, but they don't know who it is. What's going on? It was interesting. I enjoyed it. I enjoy her writing style. I like her characters. But in this one, the plot was plodding along relatively decently, and then it took a turn about 70% through, and I didn't really care for the way it ended. And that's where the 3 stars settled. Like, it's a good book. I wouldn't suggest skipping it if you had interest in it. I just think that I personally did not really enjoy how the book ended. And at one point it was juggling multiple plot lines that I think kind of jumbled the whole story itself. And like, I really want to love it because, fun fact, I don't know if I said this in any past videos, but one of my best friends from college is actually friends with Emily Henry's husband. And so like, I feel like I've got this like 6 degrees of separation connection to Emily Henry, and like, I don't want to ever be like, the book was just okay. But in this case, I'm not gonna lie to you. You guys know that by now. My opinions aren't always the most popular of opinions. And it was okay. Also, there's a lot of representation in a diverse cast, so that's always cool. Thought I should mention it. Carrying on to a book that had 0 diversity, and that is Mystic River by Dennis Lehane. Obviously, it's dated. I think it was published in like the 90s, 2001, close enough. The movie came out not long after that. I remember seeing the movie in theaters even, but I had no recollection whatsoever of the plotline. My memory is absolute shit for anybody that doesn't know. I've got no memory past like yesterday. In this book, you've got 3 childhood boys is where it starts out, and during that time, one of the boys gets abducted right in front of the other 2 by cops that aren't cops. 4 days after his abduction, he manages to escape. They're no longer friends. We jump ahead in time to their adulthood. One of them, who ironically was my least favorite character as a kid and then became my favorite character as an adult, has a daughter. He had like kind of a rough teenage life and became a teen parent, went to jail, yada yada. Things you would expect based on how he was written as a child. He's kind of turned himself around. Well, his daughter is murdered. They find her, they have no idea who's done it or why, because most people really liked his daughter Katie. One of the other boys has become a detective, and then the 3rd boy, the one that got abducted, is just kind of your average middle-aged man. So this book carries you through trying to find, the detective obviously joins in on the case knowing that he knows the man who lost his daughter, so it's going to be a little close to the chest, and it was a good mystery. And I like the writing, and the way he writes reminds me a lot of Stephen King, so if you're a Stephen King fan, this could be up your alley. What I didn't like is that I knew who did it from the beginning. Basically, like from the instant you know Katie's going to die, I knew who did it. The weird thing is that the motive I had in my head the whole time, the motivation for killing her, was not why it happened, and the reason was much more simple and not as, I wouldn't say forgivable, but not as exciting, which is shitty to say about like a murder, but I think that what I thought of would have made for a much better plot. I don't mind being able to figure out a plot early on, because like if a thriller's set up correctly, then you're not like blindsided entirely. It needs to have a better motivation than what this was. I really, really didn't like that about it. It ended up being a pretty senseless fucking death, and I can't get behind that. So I marked down 1 star, but I really liked character development. Again, I joked in the beginning that it was not a diverse plot, and that's because it's not. It's just a bunch of white people doing white people shit. AKA, it's like a Stephen King novel. Speaking of dear old Stephen King, a book that I did enjoy this month from him is Finders Keepers, which is the 2nd in the Bill Hodges trilogy after Mr. Mercedes. This carries on with the same characters. Obviously, Bill Hodges is the retired detective from the 1st book, and this kind of goes on not much longer, not much past Mr. Mercedes, but definitely some time, because one of the characters in the book that was in high school in the 1st one, Jerome, he's now like at Stanford or something, so he's there's definitely a time lapse, but not hugely so. Now, the first 200 pages of this nearly 500-page book, Bill Hodges isn't even in it. You're just building the storyline, which is that it opens with a guy who has entered the home of a writer who has stopped writing for like a decade plus, and he wants revenge because he didn't like how this writer ended a trilogy. He was obsessed with it. He had a lot of mental issues, obsessed with it, so he goes and he kills the writer, and he steals a trunk full of money, but also it's like full of, I don't know, hundreds of notebooks that had 2 more novels from that series that changed what happened to that character, as well as novellas and short stories. But then that guy goes to jail for something unrelated. So he's hidden that money and the manuscripts, and the main kid from this book, Pete, is a high schooler that finds the trunk full of these things. It comes to kind of a head after those 200 pages, and that's when Bill Hodges gets involved again. So it's very fascinating in the way that Stephen King wrote the story and how it all came together. But this one felt a little more, not cliche, but convenient compared to Mr. Mercedes. Mr. Mercedes had me on the edge of my seat and I couldn't put it down. I also couldn't put this down. I raced through it, but I felt like it was the weaker of the two. So I'm interested to see where End of Watch, the third and final in the Bill Hodges trilogy, goes, because it sounds like it's going to come back around more towards what happened in the first. But it's a 4-star instead of a 5-star because a lot of it felt a little convenient, and sometimes, which is rare for Stephen King, I think he writes kids very well, the things that happened didn't feel age appropriate. So that said, definitely good, definitely excited to carry on with End of Watch, just not as good as Mr. Mercedes. My next 4-star is the book that I DNF'd at 28%. I was trying to read it physically, I own it physically, it just wasn't doing it for me. I think I was in like the wrong headspace. If you guys watched my vlogs, I have like an undiagnosed stomach issue and stomach illness, I guess we could say, and I got taken out for a weekend because of it, and I had started reading it that week, and I think that played into it. But then Chelsea, over at Chelsea Darling Reads, was like, do you have Hoopla? Because they have the audiobook, and the audiobook is so good and so much easier to follow. And so I listened to it on audiobook, and that is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. I'm so glad that I didn't give up on it, so thank you, Chelsea, because I can't stop thinking about this book and I really want to get to the second one. Locke Lamora is about a kid, an orphan, that is a thief. He's really good at being a thief. He gets picked up by like a guy that trains little kids to be thieves for him. But Locke is a little bit more than he can handle because his thievery, his heists are more theatric and big, and he doesn't really have any way to be tied down. So the guy then sells Locke to another man named Chains, who is like posing as this priest, and Locke is brought up to not only be very intelligent but very aware, and because of that he grows so that his thievery and heisting becomes big. He's big in the game. There is a lot to unpack in this book. The plot was great. I didn't see things coming. Obviously there's a lot of death and a lot of violence in this, because you're working with thieves and you're working with, so it's fantasy, and it's very lightly fantasy. Like the fantasy only comes in the second half, if that. It might be even later than that. It's vaguely fantastical. The rest reads more like historical. So if you like Game of Thrones but a little less fantasy, I'm trying to think of what else it reminds me of. It's a lot like Mistborn too in terms of feeling of place. If you like those, then I would say this is going to be a good book for you, and I'm glad I did not give it up. I keep thinking of Locke and Jean, I think that's how you say it, his like best friend, even though I've been done for like a week and a half now. So definitely check it out. I want to say too that I'm like pretty proud of myself because my March TBR was super epic, and I didn't read I think 2 of the books on it, but they weren't books I was excited about anyway, so I'm not really that upset about it. I'm more excited about the thickness of the books I got through, such as the next one, which was my highest rated 4-star of the month, and that is Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I really enjoyed this book. I know everyone says it's thick, but one thing I've been telling people in comments on TBRs that I've seen is that yes, it's like 800 and something pages for the hardcover. I believe it's like 900 if you've got the ARC or the paperback, but it moves very fast. The text is quite large, the spacing is quite big. It is not the same as like The Lies of Locke Lamora took longer because it looks smaller, but the text was small and the pacing was slower. This was paced really fast, and that was one of the reasons this was so good, is that things happened quickly. But also did kind of lend a hand to cutting off a star for me because that fast pacing could have used a little more depth. There could have been things that were more rich. It would have made for a longer book, or perhaps a duology, and maybe that's where the standalone didn't work, but I do respect and appreciate a standalone fantasy. And because of that, because of the lack of richness and pacing, I feel like things appeared a little too convenient at times. Samantha Shannon was able to paint a good picture, the place, the environment, the scene. You're in it, and I cared about every single character that was written in there. But it was pretty clear, you could see, here's ABC happening because we need to get to DEF. And once DEF happens, that's because I needed GHI to happen. And when you get to the climax that you're building up to the whole book, it happens exactly as you'd expect. It wraps up pretty kindly. Like, it makes me think of Obsidio by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff, where at the end I was like, this is way too, here's my pretty little bow on my book. And that's how I felt about the end of this. But as I said, the characters were amazing. Like, I was in love with so many of them, and I cared about them, even the ones that, like, there's like this guy Nicholas, and he's a fucking dick, and he's selfish, and by the end I was like rooting for him. Maybe not rooting for him, but I was like, I didn't want things to happen to him. I felt bad if something went wrong. I cared about every single character in this book, even the ones that are not very good morally speaking. There is diversity in here, there is a lesbian relationship, one of them may be bi. It's not explicitly stated, but it's definitely a queer story. There's like a gay lovers romance, and it's just, there was so much representation in this, and I love dragons. Put dragons in a book with people, and I'm probably gonna give it at least a 3-star. It was so good, and I know that Samantha Shannon said she's going to write more books in this world, but not ones directly related to this, as far as I know. So I do look forward to where that goes in the future. It was a tome that I got through in like 7 days. So I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of all of you guys that have read it or intend to read it. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Very strong 4-star. As I've stated in the past videos this year, I've been trying to do rereads via audiobook of some of my favorite books in the recent past, and that I will always put them in the front of the 5-star reads just for the sake of doing so. And that is Cersei by Madeline Miller this month. I listened to the audiobook because I'd heard the audiobook was pretty good, and I agree. The narrator was really good. It was a single narration, but it worked out well. I really just wanted to revisit this, I'm not gonna lie. I won't go really far into it, but she is daughter of a god, and she gets banished for doing something that she shouldn't do to an island to live in seclusion, and a bunch of shit happens to her. She's a witch, so she's not really a god. She makes potions, and she can brew things like that. And it's just the story of Cersei, which is like an underdog character in mythology. So it's very feminist, it is very powerful, it holds my heart. This is my favorite book of last year, and my opinion has not changed. This is a real gem if you're considering reading it. Now the next 2 books, my last 2 books, are both 5 stars, and I couldn't decide which one I liked more. They're both very different books, so ignore what comes last and what I'm going to say first because they're both so good. I was approved for an arc of Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, and the hype is real, guys. Romance isn't always my favorite thing. It's very hit or miss for me. This is a story about the first son of the President of the United States who is discovering his sexuality. He's thought he was straight for his whole life, even though he's had experimental relationships, but he falls in love with the Prince of Wales. There's bi rep, there's lesbian rep, there's gay rep, there's diversity, there's a woman president. It's just a whole clusterfuck of amazing things. The story is great. The thing that I really, really loved about it, not only was it laugh out loud funny in parts, but I read that Casey was starting to write, I think she wrote this in her acknowledgements, she had started writing this when Obama was still president, before the 2016 elections. And in the middle of writing it, we had our current president elected. And she felt like giving up on the book. She didn't want to write a book about this hopeful, diverse, non-hate world that we are not currently living in. She wanted to give up, and I'm so glad she didn't, and I'm getting like getting emotional about it because hopefully we'll see the end of this soon. I have no qualms in saying that the president is not my president, and if I lose subs because of that, so be it, because I can't care if the current climate is something that you stand behind. Sorry. It gave me hope that it could, what happened in Red, White, and Royal Blue could be the future, that we could have a female president, or a gay president, or just an ethnic president again, or like just anything besides an old white bigot. So the book gave me hope. It gave me hope for love, for inclusion, for respect for a world that isn't stemming from hate. It is worth reading, especially if you're a fan of romance, especially if you're a fan of queer romance. I'm not a big political fan when it comes to contemporaries, but the politics in this book didn't take away from like the romance or the plot line. I didn't feel bogged down by it. I think it is a total 5-star read. I haven't really seen anyone say otherwise. Check it out. And the next one is my 5-star fantasy, so you can see why they kind of pitted against each other for being the top spot. That is The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This is a book about a girl who is an orphan, and she's kind of got these like slight magical abilities for healing, and she summons a djinn and he takes her back to her place of like where she's actually from, because she's this like healer that her hometown no longer has. It's just a journey. Like, I started it in February and I wanted to take my time with it because it's pretty thick. It's a slow riding book, but I absolutely love the world. There are trigger warnings for violence. Also, there's a whole section of pretty graphic self-harm, so be aware of that. But the tale that this story told and wove, I really want to check out Kingdom of Copper next. That's the next in the trilogy that just came out, I believe, in March, maybe even February. And just so good. It's a diverse book. The magic is very cool. Her ability to heal is interesting because she's only had a small grasp on it, but now she's got to learn to do all these like very specific procedures when she gets there. It is also political. There's a prince and a relationship. There is a little bit of a love story, but it's not like the cheesy like, first love, love at first sight, and now I'm in this weird, I don't know, I'm just spiraling. I liked the love in this because it wasn't forefront, didn't feel forced. So here's a recommendation for a love story and fantasy that I don't hate. Ending was super intense and I can't wait to see where it ends up going, but I haven't bought the book yet. It's one of those back burner books. We'll see when I do get to it. I hate to compare it to Aladdin because I feel like that's super cheesy to do, but the beginning felt so much like Aladdin that it hooked me, and then it became something completely otherwise. So don't go into this thinking that it's a story about Aladdin or anything like Arabian Nights really, but that's what like pulled me in, and then it became completely its own story. So 5 stars, that's it. That's my wrap up. It was a good month. That is it for me. It was an epic wrap up. It's probably gonna be forever long. I'm so sorry. Thank you if you stuck it out. I hope you guys watch this at 2 times speed, so it's not that bad. Thank you guys for being here. I hope your April is treating you well. I hope you read some great books in March. Let me know down below what your favorite was of the month. Like if you've liked this video, subscribe if you are new here and you want to see more content from me. All my social media links are down below. Let's be friends on Twitter and Instagram and Goodreads. I hope to see you in the next one, guys. Have a great day. Bye. I am shit at taking thumbnails.